That this river should be called the Columbia, this land, Oregon, that it should be the Pacific frontier of the United States, all this we take for granted now. 100 years ago, it was thought of and spoken of as manifest destiny. Oregonians have always had an awareness of history, an awareness of time measured in centuries rather than days. 1905 was such a centennial occasion. It was an occasion to celebrate. It marked the 100 years between the captains Lewis and Clark and 20th century America. The whole nation, from the Pacific to Atlantic seaboard, joined in the celebration. It was worldwide in scope, with a cottage from the Scots and participation by Asia, Oceania, Europe, and the Mideast. All this was set down in a cleared marshland to say, we are part of the nation. We are a part of the world. We are a part of the 20th century. Part of its daring, part of its new freedoms. It was a time to be excruciatingly pleased with oneself. And they were indeed. They were pleased with the time, a time of change, of discovery and invention. They wished to share these wonders with everyone. Everywhere one turned, one saw things to carry the spirit and imagination aloft. So in 1905, the first blush of the 20th century, the people of Oregon took stock of themselves. They were on a pinnacle of time. They could look forward and backward. There was much to see. In the dawn of the century, there was a magic in the winds. It seemed if you would let them, they could carry you anywhere in the world or anywhere in time.
Ocean in view, oh the joy.
Oh, the joy. So wrote Captain William Clark, November 7, 1805, after a long western journey. The captains Lewis and Clark, leaders of the Corps of Discovery, whose instructions were to cross an unknown continent, find out where flows the Oregon, and bring back scientific information. They did it all.
At daylight this morning, we were awoke by the discharge of firearms by all our party and a salute, shouts, and a song which the whole party joined in.
These were the men who started the Oregon century. In the eye of history, the Oregon country emerged with the discovery of the New World. This land was not always called Oregon, yet its other names also hinted that it was a promised land. In the Renaissance, the seas were populated with monsters and braved by stalwart ships. One was the Golden Hind, captained by Sir Francis Drake, contemporary of Shakespeare. His was the first ship to sail north along this coast of the New World. Drake claimed it for England and named it New Albion. His log reports,
"The rain which fell was an unnatural, congealed, and frozen substance. There followed most vile and stinking fogs."
It was then the Spaniards' turn. Martin Aguilar sailed north 27 years after Drake. For nearly 200 years, no other ships ventured forth. Then Bruno Heceta sailed north for the King of Spain. Moving about the imagined land was the phantom Strait of Anian, entrance to the legendary Northwest Passage. Few ships sailed off the misty coast. Sir James Cook, captain in His Majesty's Navy, fellow of the Royal Society, was one of the curious ones. The king he petitioned was George III, who had received other petitions, including many from his 13 American colonies. But these were treated less sympathetically. And as Cook rigged for his voyage, a new nation ventured forth. the United States. Following Cook came other voyagers. The Count La Pérouse was one. In the ships Astrolabe and Boussole, he planned to carry the glory of France into the Northwest Passage. Navigation was a noble art, discovery a noble science. But without seamanship, this was a wet and deadly business. There were other findings to drench the spirits of the French.
Is this the Rio de la Roise where all the men have the bearing of kings and the women? No, they are like queens, beautiful queens.
The French departed from the scene. In warmer climes, they found classic statuary, classic women, classic intrigue. Sir James Cook had also been to Easter Island. He was not impressed with the same things as Monsieur Lecomte. In his first and second voyages, Cook had penetrated further into the Southern Ocean and discovered continents, enlarging the world for his century. He was an epic explorer. His mission for his third voyage, to find the Northwest Passage. The Admiralty was so confident he would succeed, a royal squadron was dispatched to Hudson's Bay to meet him as he came through. They were to wait in vain. Cook coasted Oregon. He sailed far north, probing the fjords of British Columbia and Alaska. Each was a dead end. Cook went ashore, and though the inhabitants were not kings, he learned from them. He studied the land, and perhaps even then had a hint he was looking at fabulous wealth. The epic voyage continued to the north. No Strait of Anian was to be found. This was Cook's voyage, but with him were the sea explorers destined to make history in these waters at a later date. Vancouver, Mears, Dixon, and the Americans Ledyard and Billings. They encountered many strange animals on this voyage. Most fateful was this one, the sea otter. Its rich fur coat could make men very wealthy in the ports of Cathay. After 200 years, which had seen only 4 ships along this coast, 2 more decades brought an armada. The northwest corner of the New World was finally charted. It took on a shape that reflected reality, not legend. Names began to adhere to the land. All these ships came in quest of the sea otter and beaver. They came from all countries, Russia, Spain, England, and that new country, the United States. An industry was set in a land where there were neither cities nor governments. The unknown land became a land which everyone claimed, but no one could conquer. There was one legend that wouldn't die, the River of the West. Rumors of it drifted across the continent, yet the river remained mysterious and elusive. This was the man to find it, Captain Robert Gray, out of Boston. With a Yankee matter-of-factness, he crossed one of the most dangerous bars in the world, dropped his anchor, started a brisk trade with the Indians, and incidentally claimed the land for the United States. And the River of the West, the fabled Oregon, a river of history, took the name Columbia. The picture of the Oregon country from the sea was now complete, but the interior was still as unknown as it was at the time of Columbus. Thomas Jefferson believed that there might be dinosaurs roaming these hills. Here are his dinosaur hunters. We have met them before. Lewis and Clark found no prehistoric monsters, not even the tracks of one, but they left their own tracks on the land. The land was now defined. It awaited the people. The first to answer the call were the mountain men. The call they heard was a wild, wondrous thing. It sang of the shining mountains. In the moonlight, it drifted down the rivers, down the Missouri, the Platte, the Yellowstone, the Snake, the Columbia. The call and the men could be found in these distant reaches, which seemed close to something elemental and divine. Their journey wasn't a pilgrimage. They had a task to do. It was the trapping of beaver, and this they did. They brought the pelts to the forts, the outposts of the British and American fur companies. These were the points that linked the land with the world of politics and trade. Most important to us was Fort Astoria at the mouth of the Columbia. It was a business failure. It fell to the British in the War of 1812 without a shot, yet it was destined to win an empire for the United States. While that empire was a wilderness empire built on the fur trade, the Hudson's Bay Company emerged as its undisputed ruler. A quarter of a century after the American captains had abandoned Fort Clatsop, Fort Vancouver became the capital of a territory larger than the Kingdom of France. Ruler of this empire was a Scotsman, John McLaughlin, factor of the Hudson's Bay Company. The man destined to end his rule, but not to take his place, was Jason Lee, Methodist missionary from the United States. Lee planned to traffic in the souls of the Indians, not beaver pelts. He built missions, not forts, missions at the Dalles, in the Willamette Valley, and at Astoria. Lee and the Whitmans and the Spauldings tried to tell the Indians what they knew. While they failed to convert the Indians to the white man's God and ways of life, they did succeed in spreading their convictions about the land, Oregon, and its potential for settlement to other Americans. 10 years after their arrival, their effect was felt in London, was found in the pages of Punch. The years of peaceful joint occupation were coming to an end. In Astoria, a Hudson's Bay store and a mission could still be found side by side. But something was brewing. A tide was about to wash into Oregon. Not a tide from the seaward side, but a tide from over the mountains to the east. It was to be a tide of emigration. They came as settlers, not conquerors. After they made the crossing, they would write letters back home and draw maps as to what the land was like. What was the crossing like? There were mountains to cross. There were rivers to cross. There were plains to cross. There were rivers to follow. Each year, more restless people prepared to make the journey. Over 50,000 used the trail to seek Oregon. An 1847 sketch of the Whitman mission reveals much. Recorded are the arrival of the wagons, the arrival of the fences. There are hints of the end of the Cayuse, the end of the Whitmans. In 1849, the discovery of gold in California almost obscured Oregon entering the United States as a territory. With gold at the frontier, the surge to the west was on. Just beyond Fort Hall, the Oregon Trail forked. The travelers could make a choice, south to gold or continue westward to Oregon. There were still many who chose Oregon. This was the end of the trail, the Barlow Toll Gate. Price of admission to the Promised Land, $1 per person, 50 cents a head for livestock, widows free. How could you question the price? You couldn't turn back, and you were tired. Not too tired to build a home. And later there was time and reason to build a better home. And by 1855, homes like this were beginning to appear in Oregon. What built the homes is what built Oregon in the first decade after it entered the Union. Riverboats. There were fortunes to be made transporting those who sought the continual shifting frontier of gold. There were fortunes to be made supplying them with meat and clothing. There were fortunes to be made supplying them with wheat, flour and bread. With lumber for boom towns, shortly to be ghost towns. 90 miles from the sea, the Columbia and the Willamette joined at Portland, and that city became the hub for river and ocean trade. There was a network of rivers, the Willamette, tributary to the Columbia. The coastal rivers, the Siletz, the Coquille, the Umpqua, all had their primordial stillness pierced by the steam whistle, shook to the pulse of the last half of the 19th century on the move. Key River, of course, was the Columbia, for it cut through the Cascades. East of the mountains, Oregon was a different land, the arid West. Land of alkali rivers, rimrock, coulees, land of the horse, land of bunch grass, land of sagebrush, land of the cowhand and cattle empires. The West was wilder in eastern Oregon. The horse and stage were also part of the landscape of the Willamette Valley and western Oregon, but with a different quality, like something out of Dickens. Farther to the west, at Land's End, stages ran the ocean shore, along the farthest reach of a continent, of a nation only 100 years old. There are many ways to use the land. There are many things to seek from the land. Gold is one of them. In the 70s, Oregon's gold frontier was found in the east, in the Wallowas, in the Blues, in dark tunnels by wage earners. These were some of the towns that gold built. Canyon City, Sumter, Cornucopia, Jacksonville. These were some of the towns that cows built. Burns, Ashwood, French Glen, Antelope, Madras. There are many ways to use the land. There are many things to seek from the land. Wheat was another. The rivers, too, could be mined. Mined for salmon. The ocean held the same treasure. The hills provided another bounty, lumber. The land was kind, and a pattern grew in the land, the pattern of Oregon's cities. It sprang from ancient roots, the legends of Quivira and Anion appearing as reality. Many such cities sprang up in the rich Willamette Valley and in all of Oregon. They were but towns, all having a frontier rawness and a quietness that made them a good place to grow a family who could build something better. In the shadow of old Fort Vancouver, Portland continued to grow and take its place as capital of the Northwest Empire. In sight of the ruins of Fort Clatsop, Astor's enterprise continued to grow. There were the builders of the cities, and there were those ready to protect them, to fight fires, to the delight of boys and dogs. There were those ready to preserve law and order. There were those who liked to preserve tradition. Others simply liked to have a good time. There were many things to celebrate. There were many towns to celebrate in at the close of the 7th decade of the 19th century. In the 80s, there was a momentous occasion to shout about, to beat the drums for, to tootle the horns. The whole nation had waited a long time for this. Even at the end, they waited. This was something that must be prepared for by ritual, for a marvel was about to appear. Not yet. It is getting close, though. These men have prepared the way. And here it is, the marvel of the century, the transcontinental train complete with cougar catcher. Now the whole nation was linked by a ribbon of steel, a clear passage from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon. The way was still not easy. The train's on time, but it's yesterday's train. In the Columbia Gorge, there was still the echo of the steam whistle, but new notes in the chorus now. Each sang a song for the same freight, for the same passengers. At last, an ancient dream was realized. The River of the West did join the Atlantic. There was a Northwest Passage. It was a man-made one, a passage of rails and ties which ran right down to the sea in ships. And the two together could go any place in the world. The physical frontier was reached and won. But there was a price. Some of it was paid for in blood, in wars. In the 50s, many blockhouses dotted the Oregon landscape. The land itself seemed awesome and hostile, but the Indians weren't the only enemy. By the 70s, most Indians had been sent to reservations and continued their ancestral way of life. The way of life was modified. They were now part of the landscape that was no longer hostile, no longer lonely. Sometimes, in a photographic parlor, they would try to recapture an old image. It didn't quite come off. 50 years before, the eye and hand of the artist George Catlin had found this. He was talented in preserving men and beasts marked for extinction. He caught a glimpse of the rage and an awareness of what was about to happen. Traditions die hard, die tragically, with moments of grandeur. Joseph and the Nez Perce were cast in such a tragedy. Captain Jack was cast in the prologue. It was known as the Modoc War. Jack, like Joseph, was a leader who wanted peace and freedom for his people. Like Joseph, he was bound to those who wanted war, chained to a fate that would bring neither peace nor freedom. Against the Modocs were marshaled 1,000 federal troops commanded by Major General Edward Richard Sprigg Canby. This was the enemy. Bogus Charlie, Scarface Charlie, Shack Nasty Jim. All in all, a force of fewer than 100 men and boys. This is the land they fought over. For 6 months, bullets ricocheted here and men died. In the spring of '73, peace negotiations were begun. On April 11th, they were ended once and for all on a note of horror. Jack murdered General Canby in this tent, which could have been the place for him to realize his hope for peace. He was now a murderer without honor, no longer a respected foe. The line that separates the two is a fine one, too fine for the tortured mind of Captain Jack. The Army now had motive for vengeance and brought the campaign to an end. The end was now the noose, but they didn't seem to care. A bit more posing about the camp, the friendly ones posing with the victors. And then time took over. All that was left were the quick and the dead. The dead and the land. The land didn't seem to care. Sometimes the land and the river would get downright mean. Sometimes it would get kind of wild and go on a rampage. 94 was one of those times. But it was the people now who didn't seem to care. The land was theirs now, and they could take many things in their stride. They could turn almost any situation to their own advantage. Business as usual, and business was good. Even when the streets were dry, business was good. The last decade of the 19th century was a time of optimism, a time of opulence. The source of the optimism, the source of the opulence, the trees. They were something, these trees. They were giants. They were something that couldn't be measured in the span of a man. The trees, cedar, pine, spruce, hemlock, Douglas fir. The trees. They were something, these trees. It took an axe as sharp as a razor to cut them. The chips could knock your head off. You could drown in the pitch that poured out of them. And when they came down, the earth shook. And the earth did a lot of shaking as the men came through, letting the daylight into the woods. The men, they were something too. Even the boys were something. The whistle punks who were living the legend of Paul Bunyan. The real legendary force in the woods was steam. Steam on rails. Steam for the donkeys and high line. This was the arm and muscle of Paul Bunyan. This did the deed. 1860, 30 million board feet. 1870, 75 million board feet. 1880, 177 million board feet. 1890, 462 million board feet. 1900, 735 million board feet. Steam was now master of the woods. There were 287 mills in Oregon. In 1904, there were 324, and the woods in Oregon produced 1 billion board feet of lumber. There was a price. The land paid it, the people paid it. It was costly. There are many destructive forces in the woods. This is an old, old one. Here in the forests of Oregon, an enemy was finally recognized. It was something larger than fire. It was the naked destruction of natural resources. Steps were taken to do something about it. The act at the time might be a very small thing. What counts is the awareness of conservation behind it. This awareness made Oregon an endless frontier of forest land. The 20th century had a raucous, sputtering beginning in Oregon, too. The symbols of the 19th century quietly sank into the land, into the past. (1905). We have come forward a century. We have found the marks of more distant centuries, too. we have glimpsed at the hint of the future, too. The frontier of the future is an inner one. It is for those who have the heritage and spirit to venture into it.